It's all about the money and helping you hold on to yours and get value for money from when you spend it. It's time for Consumer Talk, and our consumer journalist Wendy Knowler is once again not with us in studio. She's joining us via Zoom with news hot off the press, because Wendy has been attending the release of the Consumer Ombud's annual report, and it contains all kinds of fascinating nuggets about the kinds of things consumers are complaining about, how those complaints are being resolved, in whose favour, with what sort of financial consequences, etc. Lots for us to learn from this on a practical level, and Wendy will fill us in on some of the notable trends and categories of complaint. And then I hope we'll have space for a couple of open line calls towards the end of the hour as well. So as always, if you would like to send a question through, you can WhatsApp me on 072 567 1567. Great to have you with us again, Wendy, even if it must be from afar. Welcome to the show.
So it was the release of the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud's annual report for 2025-26. The year goes from March to the end of Feb.
Okay.
And they did it at the University of KwaZulu-Natal School of Law, because the Ombud's office has started a collaboration with law faculties at universities around the country to reach more people,
Okay.
which was a big part of the activities for the year in question. And I'm attending in person for a change, which is really nice to meet stakeholders I talk to all the time, face to face. And as with all Ombud's reports, the report reveals how many consumers turned to them for help, how much money, as you say, was refunded to consumers. And an interesting statistic which I always look at, and that is what percentage of consumers' cases that were taken up, because a lot fall, by the way, because they're for a different Ombud's office or different consumer protection agency. What percentage went the way of the consumer? And you'll know with the financial services Ombuds, it's usually quite low, because a lot of that is fraud and whatever, where the bank can't be found to have done anything wrong. And this case, 64% of complaints were resolved in favor of consumers, which is a really encouraging statistic for consumers. So yeah, and they're also looking at how long it took them to close cases on average, which was 52 days. Their mandate is under 60. So that, yeah. But for me, always with these reports, the most interesting bits are the marketplace trends and areas of concern which are identified. And best of all, I always go straight to the case studies, because they carry important lessons for all of us, and they always choose some that went in the favor of the consumer and some that didn't, that went the way of the supplier, which gives the rest of us an idea of the sort of issues that are at play when we have a complaint, whether it's valid or not.
Looking forward to hearing some of those case studies, Wendy. But before we do that, there's quite a curious observation, and you've alluded to part of the reason behind it already, but it's around the number of complaints the office dealt with in this past year.
Sure. So in terms of how people got hold of the office, so in the year in question, 2025-26, 9,204 consumers emailed, which was down from 10,000 and something the year before, and 11,000 and something the year before that. Almost 26,000 people phoned in, which was down from 27,000. But the complaints received went up to over 15,000, which was a substantial increase, 3,000 more complaints than the previous year, which it doesn't really add up.
Yeah, so explain to us why that is. So off a smaller volume of incoming approaches, they actually dealt with more complaints. And as you've already alluded to, that's partly to do with the way they are engaging with the public, Wendy.
Exactly. So the office went out and found consumers instead of waiting for them to come to it. So they run satellite offices based at universities. Chairman Michael Lawrence calls them the heart of this effort. Hence holding the report release here at the University of Durban-Westville. Since the financial year closed, they've actually opened a 5th satellite office at Northwest University's Mahikeng campus, and they're talking about opening one at the law faculty at the University of the Free State. And they also did a lot of activations, not only in shopping malls, which was traditional, but they went to campuses, churches, clinics, expos, hospitals, schools, trade shows, talking to people, often sort of sitting in front of them in their own language,
Yeah.
telling them about the CGSO, because for a lot of people in those areas, they just have never heard of it and don't know that this is a free way for them to raise their complaints in the hope of getting some recourse. So, and then on the other hand, you had the Ombud, Lisa Brati, who's sitting next to me now and will join us in a minute, doing TikTok videos for the first time and reaching that audience, um, untapped audience. And whether we like it or not, a lot of people are turning to TikTok solely for news and advice, etc. So at both ends of the spectrum, and more people hearing about the office and the role that it plays in mediating consumer disputes with suppliers.
Interesting. Yeah, already somebody asking me at which university those offices are. I did a quick Google to check. So Northwest University, University of Limpopo, of Fort Hare, and of Venda, it looks like. Wendy, is that correct?
I think so. I've got the Ombud here if you want to butt in, Lee.
Yeah, hi. We are currently in the process. Hi to
Hi there,
everybody. We are in
welcome.
the process of formally establishing these offices with a number of universities. I know University of Pretoria is in the mix. We're currently discussing one with University of KwaZulu-Natal. That's where we're currently based. So, of course, as we unpack and as we essentially open up the doors for consumers, and in fact, also we're engaging with the University of Cape Town to ensure that we spread the net as far as possible so that no consumer is left behind.
That's great news. Lee, thank you so much. And we'll be formally bringing you into the conversation just now, but that voice, of course, belonging to the Ombud himself, Lee Subrathi. Before we get to him, Wendy, you wanted to share a little bit of insight into some of the key takeaways of this annual report. And as you've said, it's about engaging with more consumers and reaching more people who had consumer complaints. Let's talk about what the net impact of that outreach was. To what financial extent did consumers benefit by going to the Ombud and saying, please help?
Okay, so this is over the course of just that most recent year under review, almost 13 million, 12.9 million rand, which was 1 million more than the previous year.
Okay.
That's a big number if you think about it. What that would have meant to those people to get that money refunded.
Yeah.
And the average time, I think I did mention to close a complaint, because this is a question I always look at, because people want help sooner rather than later. But it is a process of mediation after all. And so, to get both parties to the table. So 52 days on average. For some people, it would have been a lot less, and for others, more. But their mandate is 60 days. So they are within that. And bearing in mind, it's pretty good when you consider that they had so many more complaints coming in this year due to all that outreach. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the kinds of complaints. What were the sort of overall categories that saw the most complaints, Wendy?
Okay, so the top 10 categories account for 10,000 and something of the 15,000 total complaints, so 69% of everything. Goods becoming defective within the first 6 months is at the top of the list, and that wouldn't surprise you or any of our listeners, given how much we talk about this on the show, Pippa. So that was 19% of the totals. Cancellations, so wanting to cancel and not being able to, 16%. Another non-surprise, late or incorrect delivery of goods, combined at 25%. Goods becoming defective after 6 months, and that's largely to do with consumers not understanding that the supplier has the discretion, that the CPA warranty is only for the first 6 months, and after that, you can't insist on a refund, for example. And of course, and then other things like quality disputes, overcharging, delayed services, and deposits that weren't refunded. The deposit one also being big in my inbox. By sector, and again, no surprise, online transactions are the single biggest source at 26%, ahead of appliance manufacturers and retailers, furniture retailers, and satellite and telecoms. Those are going to be your cell phone contracts.
Okay, and as you say, no surprise to us because we receive those complaints too. Yeah.
But new categories this year, interestingly, in the year under review: auctions, animals and livestock, carpeting, cement, packaging, paint, and vehicle parts. I know the parts to be a big problem. Those brought in 1,441 complaints alone, which is 9% of the total of categories which didn't actually exist a couple of years ago.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, so Wendy, let's take a look at a couple of those case studies before we bring Lee in for some further comment, because as you said, they're a very good way of demonstrating how the process works, the kinds of things you can take to the Ombud, and what kind of outcome you might receive. Shall we start with the case of the bed that came out of its packaging?
Yes, okay. So somebody ordered a 3/4 bed online. It arrived and she or he realized it was too small. And she immediately, let's say she, wanted to swap it for a double. And she told the delivery guy that absolutely on the spot. In other words, take the bed away and I'm going to upgrade to a larger bed. But the deliverer said the bed has already been stripped.
Of its plastic
And
covering?
so,
Yeah.
yeah, stripped of its original packaging. Sorry, stripped sounds like they took the sheets off. Yeah, took it out of its packaging, and then when she engaged with the supplier about paying an extra, them taking the 3/4 back and paying an extra for the larger bed, they said, fine, we can do that, but there's going to be a 15% handling fee, which she objected to. So she took her complaint to the CGSO, who referred to Section 44 of the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, called ECTA or ECT Act, because that governs online purchases, which gives us all, when we buy online, 7 days from the date of delivery to cancel for no particular reason at all. It doesn't have to be anything wrong with the product. And there can be no penalty. The only thing is that they can make the consumer pay to get the product back to them. A lot of suppliers will absorb that cost, but not all. So essentially, that was the outcome. The CGSO told the bed supplier to drop that 15%, and that they could only recover the actual cost of getting the bed back to them, the unwanted 3/4 bed. So I think, obviously a lot of lessons for people in what you can and can't do, because a supplier can charge you a 15% handling fee if you want to take back, say, tiles you bought from their physical shop because you over-ordered. They can do that, and it's take it or leave it, because they don't have to take them back, right? Because you were stood in the store and you could choose the tiles and touch them and make sure they're what you wanted. So in some cases, in case of a physical shop, they can do it, and there's nothing you can do about it unless the goods are defective. But for change and heart, they can charge you the handling fee. But the point is that when you buy online, when you use a screen to buy, you can send it back within a week, and there's absolutely illegal for them to charge you a handling fee.
And Wendy, just before we break for news, also an important issue this reminds us of is not to accept that fob off of it's got to be in the original packaging, or to be very careful about preserving original packaging. I'm thinking of that cupboard in my house, which has got I don't know how many old cell phone boxes that we've kept just in case the phone had to be returned years after the phone is no longer in use, and I think no longer even in existence in the house. The boxes are still there. What are the parameters of what is acceptable to be asked to keep or hold on to, and when is it not reasonable to be expected to return something in the packaging? Lee, would you like to respond?
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of sort of angles that one can approach this type of conversation. But essentially, if a consumer returns goods that's sealed, that hasn't been opened at all, then of course there can't be any fees for restoration costs. But if they've opened up the package, if they've broken obviously the seal or the box or whatever it is, the Consumer Protection Act at Section 20, subsection 6 allows the provider to charge reasonable restoration costs to bring those goods up in order to make it a resellable position. However, this does not mean that if goods become defective, that a supplier can reject it simply because the package or the boxing has been damaged. That is a totally separate conversation, and I think consumers have to be sort of informed and understand how that works. It's very important.
Okay, so if I can give you an example here. So if somebody bought a cell phone, took it out the box, decided they didn't like the look of it and wanted to return it, the cell phone seller could say, we're going to charge you the cost of a new box. But if that phone wasn't working, the issue of the box being there or not would be a non-issue. Am I understanding you correctly?
100%.
Okay.
So the defective issue becomes the prevailing issue, which what we'll need to resolve.
Okay, great.
The only problem with you and throwing out all those boxes from your cupboard, Pippa, is that from month 7, the manufacturer's warranty kicks in, and I don't know, you can correct me here, Lee, but they almost always will say that, no original packaging, no warranty claim. and that's what they do in practice. Lee, do you think that's unfair? Because that's how it works in my experience.
Yeah, so of course, while a supplier may have all of the terms and conditions that they want to include, we will always test that against the fairness and reasonableness in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. And of course, if a supplier's warranty is up to 2 years or 1 year, one needs to focus on the issue, is the device defective in terms of that warranty or not? I would see it unfair to hold a consumer ransom for packaging in order to determine whether the goods meet those standards. So it's something that we will definitely look into if it lands on our table.
So great. So if that happens to you, don't automatically think, oh, well, it's the warrant, it's out of CPA warranty. I have to just do, listen to what the manufacturer says. I would say it's definitely a case to take it to the CGSO, and bearing in mind you've got nothing to lose. It's a free service.
Yeah.
I would certainly do that if it happened to me.
Immediately somebody writing in to say, I had this at the iStore at Canal Walk. They will not allow you to bring back a phone if the box has been opened. I'd bought my father an iPad with Wi-Fi, and I realized I needed an iPad with cellular, and they refused to do the swap because they said the box had been opened and it could not be returned.
Okay, well, that is slightly different, though, because that phone was not defective. They decided they wanted something else. Unless she specifically said, I need this, and they gave her a phone that didn't have it. Are you?
Yeah, so the important distinction here, Pippa, is that there's a difference of rights of return for online or buying face-to-face, your brick and mortar store.
Yeah.
If you go and buy it face-to-face in the store, there is no right of or change of mind return unless the supplier allows you to do it. Therefore, their terms and conditions will apply.
Right.
But if it's online, it's a different story altogether. But we look at it based on the circumstances around the case to determine a fair outcome.
Okay, so they were within their rights in that case, because it sounds like you bought the item at the store, you had the opportunity to examine it, unless they had deliberately missold it to you, where you said you needed X and they gave you Y. It is their right to set those terms. Dave writes to say, in the past, I've taken a faulty device into the store without the box and asked for an exchange. And when they ask where is the box, I told them to just give me the product and keep the new box to put my faulty device into. Okay, thanks, Dave. Well, I hope it works. All right, Wendy, let's move on to the next case study. It feels like a bit of a Nancy Drew series this afternoon. Next up is the case of the peeling laptop.
The peeling laptop. This one went against the consumer, I must just say, as a spoiler. They bought a laptop from a major retailer. So you can tell with these case studies, there's no names of the complainant, there's no names of the retailer. It's just, the takeaway is the circumstances, the real cases. Bought a laptop from a major retailer in February last year. It began to physically deteriorate. Components were loosening and bits were peeling. Doesn't sound very appealing.
Yeah.
It went in for a warranty repair, but the customer wasn't happy, didn't feel that it had been fully repaired. The retailer then wanted to have another go at repairing it, and the customer at that point refused and demanded the laptop be declared defective, and with them choosing between a replacement or a refund or credit. And they also, interestingly, because that process of assessing the warranty repair, that took 3 weeks. And, most people relate, you don't want to be without a laptop for that long. So they went and bought a second laptop for work during those 3 weeks while they didn't have the use of their own laptop. The retailer said the machine went in twice for 2 unrelated faults. Both were repaired, tested afterwards, and they worked, and they dispute that it's inherently defective and say they will keep repairing it under warranty. The CGSO found for the retailer because of when the faults arise. So sections 55 and 6 say that you have a 6 months warranty, that your goods remain fit for purpose, good quality, etc. I'm thinking here of peeling as well. And so if that happens inside 6 months, you're good. And it's your choice, and they don't have the right to 2 bites at the repair cherry. Once they've tried once, then you get to decide after that between a replacement and a refund. But this laptop started flaking after that 6 months period. That was the distinction. So it was the timing that was wrong, and so that was the takeout here is that if something you bought starts going a little bit wrong, don't wait, immediately raise it within that 6 months period. Realize how golden that 6 months is, because after that you lose a lot of rights, certainly in terms of demanding a refund or replacement. And as in this case, the supplier then wants to just keep saying, okay, well, it's our warranty, we'll honor it, and we're going to keep repairing it. So act fast within those 6 months.
Okay, and yeah, the minute you see something start going wrong, also start documenting and putting things in writing, and making sure you have a paper trail to follow there. Okay, maybe let's take one more case study, Wendy, before we head some questions back Lee's way. This is the case of the funeral invoice.
Yes, I'm going to go very quickly through this one, but essentially a family paid a funeral parlor for services and items either never provided according to them or billed twice. They only picked up the problems at the funeral itself. And of course, the parlor, when approached by the CGS adjudicators, said, denied it all. And the lesson here is that the family, I mean, you're burying a loved one, they weren't thinking of getting evidence. And without videos or photographs of the missing services or items that they claimed weren't there, there was no proof. And so the Ombud's office couldn't rule in favor of the consumer because there was no evidence to back up their claim. So the delivery is that you need to protect yourself by gathering evidence of suppliers giving you substandard or missing, not giving you what you paid for. And also you need to have that evidence against a detailed invoice. So when someone's providing you with a service, don't just let them say, tablecloths. Let there be a description of the tablecloth so that you have something to hold them to
if they don't deliver.
You don't get what I think a lot of us are very comfortable with verbal agreements, but when it comes to a dispute, there's no evidence of that. So especially with functions, there's so many degrees of quality that could be delivered. So insist on everything being exquisitely detailed in the invoice so that you have your proof of what you were told you were going to be getting for your money.
Okay. Thanks for that, Wendy. All right, so let's move away from the case studies now. And I know you've got a couple of questions you want to put directly to Lee. And just to remind listeners, and for the sake of anybody who's come in midway, the second voice you're hearing this afternoon over the Zoom call belongs to Lee Subrathi, who is the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud, whose office released its annual report this morning. And Wendy, I'm going to hand over to you to put a couple of questions to Lee directly.
Sure. So we heard that the online shopping complaints were the largest category, which is probably no surprise. I want to ask you, do you get complaints? Well, first of all, the first question I want to ask you is about how online shopping has grown, whether you want to compare it to 2 years ago, COVID years, so just to put the context there. And then secondly, I'd like you to talk to something that's come up for us and that we've discussed on the show, and I think it's worth repeating because it's so common. A lot of these online retailers have in their terms and conditions a clause that says, if you bought this item on sale, you have no right of return. That's the 7-day cooling off period, which is shocking to me, given how many of these sites have permanent sales or else tempt you with a 10% off first purchase. And then according to their terms and conditions, they're saying if it doesn't fit, if it's the wrong color, whatever, you having not seen it before you bought it, you don't have a right of return.
Yeah. So number one, to address your question, Wendy, is that we've seen a proliferation of online consumer complaints. I mean, just post-COVID, and I apologize for going back to COVID, but we have to use it as a reference. We saw a 66% spike in that year of digitization, consumers using online services. The CGSO themselves jumped from 2%, Pippa, in that year to 35% the following year. So that shows you the massive jump. So we are dealing with the digital consumer. With regards to the other matter, it's that the terms and conditions, and like I said this before, is that it cannot be in violation of prescriptive law. We have ECTA, we have the Consumer Protection Act. Now, many consumers may think these are two separate acts, but we use them collectively to deliver on reasonableness, to deliver on fairness. So in essence, if the acts don't provide allow a provider to put a clause in there saying that we will not return goods on sale, we have to test it against the legislation. And I haven't come across legislation that says that if it's on sale, you can't return it unless Section 56, I think subsection 55, subsection 6, I think says that there are certain conditions in the sense that if I bring the condition of the goods to you beforehand, and if you appreciate the fact that this good may be a slightly defective to a certain degree, it's all about disclosure, then of course your rights will be limited. But having blanket no refund policies, having blanket no return policies, if it is in violation of the act, your Ombud would be quite strong in the recommendation to make sure that the consumer is given the relief and the supplier corrects their terms and conditions accordingly.
Okay.
So yeah, I've tackled I think at least 3 of these retailers. I don't know whether they were doing it in ignorance or on purpose to deny their customers the right of return, because that's the downside for online retailers, is that people have the right to return goods, right, if they don't fit or whatever, for no particular, they can just change their minds. But they all said, oh, we didn't realize, and they changed their terms and conditions. So if you see that as an online shopper, check the terms and conditions. And if you see no return on sale items, I would urge you to tackle them on it and say that's not in keeping with consumer law. I mean, it's the Electronic Transactions and what? Electronic Communications and Transactions Act. But just say it's illegal, because, I mean, things change when lots of consumers stand up for themselves.
Yeah. And Wendy, as you've rightly said before, if they're prepared to play fast and loose with that clause, then what else are they going to be playing fast and loose with when it comes to your right of return, etc.? So, be mindful. Obviously, as you could say, that make allowances for the fact that maybe once the first time it can be ignorance, but if you continue to see that clause being thrown at you, it's a red flag. You also wanted to ask Lee about some gaps between the CPA and the ECT.
And your previous answer sort of leads us very nicely into this question, and it came up in the release of the report. There are gaps between the CPA and the ECT Act that governs online shopping. Your office has gone to the NCC and to the DTIC with a joint position paper, which I only learned about today. What are you actually asking for in the interests of protecting the consumer?
No, 100%. And I think we have to look at this within the context of when were these pieces of legislation drafted. We're talking about 2010, we're talking about 2002. This was before any real sort of online or AI as we're seeing it today. And I think the important thing to remember is that prescriptive law, especially these acts, while they may establish, this expectations and certain constructs, we can't apply it. We have to apply it in a purposive way, which means that we have to look at where are the gaps, but then apply how can we correct those gaps. So part of that e-commerce paper, Wendy will share it with you later today, it addresses some of the practical gaps that we are seeing and some of the interventions that we have to apply to almost fill in those gaps. And it would assist us if that can be then embedded into law. So it helps the dispute resolution process flow along. And it's quite natural with any piece of legislation, you are going to have gaps. It is going to outgrow, the climate, which is why we get the opportunity to amend these regulations. Things like, for example, is the 7-day cooling off and 5-day cooling off period still relevant? Are things like the terms and conditions according to, are the types of products that are excluded from the return in terms of EXA, is it still current and prevalent?
Would you name some of them?
So some of the things at the moment includes things like accommodation, things like CDs and food that you purchase. So they are the whole list of them is in section 42 of ECTA. However, like I'm saying, one is to go back and ask, is it still relevant today, especially with the types of goods that's being offered to consumer with instant purchasing power in the consumer's hands?
Interesting. Yeah.
Definitely something for me to follow up on. I wasn't aware that was happening, so I look forward to diving into that one. Okay, and this is the last question for Lee, and it's one that, well, actually, probably 2 questions. Let's see if we've got time. So in almost 1 out of 5 cases of consumer complaints, you have to essentially tell them that you couldn't help them and give them a termination notice and refer them to the National Consumer Commission because the supplier is not coming to the party.
Sure.
So this, just for a bit of context, the CGSO has members which actually fund, members being the suppliers that fund the whole operation, but they don't, if you complain about a company that's not a member of the CGSO, they don't, they take it up anyway. It's not like they will exclude, they will say we can't help you because that company's not a member. But what happens to those? Is that termination rate where you just can't proceed because you're offering a mediation service and the other party's not coming? How do you feel about that? Is it something that bothers you? And do you as an Ombud's office have a strategy to try and deal with that?
Definitely. I mean, you asked me how I feel. It actually breaks my heart, to be quite honest with you. Is because, I mean, this is 13% of complaints that consumers can't receive practical relief simply because a supplier is intentionally choosing to ignore a process which they by law are compelled to. It's not a choice. They are compelled to comply. This was in 2021, I'm sure you'd remember the Voltex case where we took, there was a declaration order by court whereby it says the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud is necessary. All goods and services suppliers have to participate. And what I can say, and this is a clarion call upon all suppliers, it is in your best interest to comply, to serve the consumers, because it not only adds trust to your brand, it prevents a hefty fine being charged on you should the National Consumer Commission take you to the National Consumer Tribunal. That is not a place you want to be, is because that then affects your reputation. So yes, it is disappointing, Wendy. We try our best efforts to get responses, but like with any mediation, we require two parties to dance or to play the tango, so to speak, and we can't do it without a party assisting us. So yes, once again, please assist us, comply with the code so that we can provide outcomes for consumers and suppliers.
Okay. Wendy, I think we can squeeze in one last question.
Supporting listening.
Yeah.
What was the last thing I want to... Oh, yes. So you say, and this makes sense, that suppliers who choose to participate in the scheme show higher levels of engagement and responsiveness. That follows. So should consumers be able to see at a glance before they buy whether or not a company is signed up? This is not something that I'm totally aware of. And I think we as consumers, it strikes me that if we asked companies, looked for it, and then asked them why they weren't, because I'd certainly want to feel more comfortable doing business with a company that had chosen to participate in the Ombud scheme, because it follows that they're going to engage and be more responsive. So is there some kind of searchable list that we can find? Okay. Yeah.
So on the Consumer Goods and Services website, we have a list of suppliers. And I like what Wendy says in the sense that as a consumer, you assist us from the consumer protection framework by doing your due diligence. And it ties in with the funeral service dispute that we had, is that if you set the conditions, the preconditions for your expectations, and you follow that up with the photos and everything else, there's a beautiful term that's known as social sanction when it comes to businesses. Businesses have a legal requirement to exist, but they also have a social acceptance. And we determine that social acceptance by consumers taking the stand to call out suppliers when they fall short. For example, why are you not registered with the CGSO? Is it in your best interest? Should I even transact with you? Is because am I protected as a consumer? This is how we start to be proactive consumers and therefore make the system robust and try to augment it as much as we can.
That's a fantastic note on which to wrap up the conversation, Lee. And just for those who are asking already, that website, am I correct in saying it's cgso.org.za?
That is correct, Pippa, 100%.
Wonderful to have you with us this afternoon. Lisa Brathu, thank you so much. Our Consumer Goods and Services Ombud. That website again is cgso.org.za. And Wendy, thank you so much for attending the launch and giving us all of that news and latest stats and info hot off the press, as it were. Great to have you with us today.
Lovely. Thanks, Pippa.
We'll chat again next week. Wendy Knowler, our consumer journalist and activist. And a reminder that if you want to bring a case her way, the best thing to do is to go to her website, which is wendyknowler.co.za, spelled Knowler, wendyknowler.co.za.